communication. So what I do is I try to address these objections before they ever come up. And that's why it's important to go and do your research. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, okay, what's the problem here? Well, the guy, what did Paul say? You put the 3 Ps. You put the sign in the yard, put it on the MLS, and pray that it sells. Well, that's really what people do. It's terrible, and then they have bad marketing to go along with it. So I'll just ask people what they expect, and then I look up those #1 complaints. So the 2 that I know for sure, and this works for me every time in listing appointments, is lack of communication. Lack of communication. So I set that expectation. I'm like, all right, I'm going to touch base with you every week, every 3 days. What do you want? Like, what makes you comfortable? There's some people you don't need to talk to them for a month and they're fine. But just ask them, and they'll appreciate you asking them versus having like a preset formula for it, which you can do. The second one is being stuck in a long-term contract with a realtor that overpromises and underdelivers. So that's where you'll see expired listings. That's going to be that objection. You're going to hear that a lot. And I hit them with, they have value propositions in here. My biggest one, and this depends on the area, but my biggest one is I do a 30-day listing agreement, right? Most people, they get tied into like a 6-month contract. If you can't sell it in 30 days in King County, like you're doing something wrong, or it's overpriced or what have you. And I'll tell them, like, listen, if you don't think I'm doing my job at any point during this contract, we can terminate it. It takes a lot of pressure off of them, and it's kind of like a reverse psychology. Now they're not going to cancel it, right? So that's just what I do. You guys want to come up with your own value propositions, though. And if mine work for you, great, use them. But, don't get caught up in what everybody else is doing, I guess. Tell them about the process of selling a house. Anybody? Can anybody explain that?
Starting from list.
Like, say you had a listing and you're trying to tell your seller how this is going to work. I just sent you an offer, you accepted it. What's next?
Inspection.
Okay.
John Ganson actually has like a flow chart.
There's a flow chart.
Use that thing. That's a huge, that's marketing at its finest, but people don't realize it. These guys don't understand the process, so I'll tell people, I'm like, listen, we just got this offer, we accepted it, I know you're all excited. We need to make sure these people turn in their earnest money, right? They don't turn in the earnest money, we can terminate the contract. You need to know all these ins and outs so you can say, we can terminate the deal based upon this. Because otherwise you will end up getting jerked around by some buyers that aren't serious. I always call the people's lenders. I don't know if anybody practices that, but pre-approval letters are a dime a dozen. If you get locked into a contract and that person can't close, who do you think that is going to fall back on? Who looks bad?
Do you call them when you're negotiating out, especially if you have multiple offers? Aren't you reaching out to those lenders before?
Before I accept. Yeah. So, good question.
Credit score and debt to income ratio, and if they are a W-2 wage earner, or are they self-employed, which is going to be a more complicated loan.
Oh yeah.
I ask all those questions.
Oh yeah. I'll just ask if they're underwritten or not.
Yeah.
Just keep it simple and kind of use your best judgment on that, because there's some lenders that are better than others, and I'm not gonna get into that and bash them. Don't accept an offer with BECU. I had a bad experience with that. It's and if you're working with buyers, yeah, it's always better to work with a mortgage broker than a bank. But yeah, you always want to qualify that. You want to think of all the things that could go wrong before they go wrong, because when they do, regardless of if it's your fault or not, you're the person that it represents. So, like, say somebody does an inspection and they just back out without trying to negotiate or anything. What does that tell you? Anybody? Opinions?
He can't afford it.
That's exactly it.
And then they use that to get
Exactly.
out. Yeah.
Are you Shar?
Huh?
Shar?
No.
Oh, you look look familiar. My fault. Can you forgive me? Anyways, yes, she's absolutely right. That tells you that number one, they weren't very serious, or number two, they put an offer on another house. So you want to ask, like, hey, how serious is your client? And I gauge these things. I look at things like how much earnest money are they willing to put down. You know, I don't know if everybody does that, but I do. Because it tells me, like say somebody comes in with an FHA loan and they're trying to put $1,000 earnest money down, they might not have the money to close this deal, right? So, hey, is your guy going to need closing costs? Is your gal going to need closing costs? Just ask these questions up front and try to qualify that buyer, because most buyer's agents aren't going to be as skilled as listing agents, right? They just want to go out and put in offers, and they'll put in 8 offers in one day. They're like, hey, let's back out of this deal. Let's back out of this. I've seen it a million times. But yeah, you want to try to gauge how serious people are. And sometimes I'll tell people, like, hey, why don't you go look at the house again before you put an offer? Because when that falls through, it looks bad on you, and there's really nothing you could have done about it. But it's important to have that tone set, because when the deal falls through, you want your seller to go back on the market with you and still trust you, right? So do everything you can to keep them trusting you. Let's see here.
Joshua, did you always make sure you just giving the information to your seller? You know what I'm saying? Like, you just bringing in the information and letting them decide. Like you said, like certain certain buyers, you kind of questioning, you make sure they're clear about the information, and they decide so they know offhand. If something go bad, you remember.
Yeah. You made this decision. Yeah.
You lead that decision, but you making everything real clear up front what your caution is.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
And it's really important. And one of the things that I'll tell people is, listen, I have a fiduciary duty to you, not to anybody else. So I'll tell them, like, hey, I called and I asked this. These were the answers. This is what I think. I'll always tell people what I think. They hired you for a reason.
Right.
But you don't want to steer them in one direction or the other, because then you're like walking the ethics line.
Yeah, then they come back.
And when you end up wrong, it's going to suck.
Yeah, very bad.
When you end up wrong, it's going to really suck.
Hey Josh,
So,
do you do any pre-inspections? Because I didn't lose the listing, but they did a side sewer inspection. That's easy to do because they found something.
tell me about that.
Well, they did the inspection, and
Sewer
they
scope?
recommended doing a side sewer inspection because of the age of the house.
Yeah.
They scoped it and found something potentially wrong and said, hey, this is gonna cost $20,000 to fix. And so the buyer backed out because they just got freaked out. The buyer agent didn't, educate them properly. And we had it flushed and it was all fine, and we were able to cover it for the next buyer, but it just blew their first deal.
So what's the question?
Well, I was just wondering if you ever do a pre-inspection to catch potential
To address those things first.
problems.
Where was this?
Nunbury Park.
So up in Seattle?
Nunbury Park is
Like right outside of Perry.
Okay, so a hot
So are
area.
you asking, does he allow, as a listing agent, does he
Do I do
allow
pre-inspection?
I was
buyers
just
to do
wondering-
pre-inspections?
No, I was just
Or do
wondering-
you advise
Do
sellers
that.
Do have
to
the
do
seller
it?
Gives
maybe
you-
check out some things that might be a potential problem.
Everybody argue right now. To answer your question, no, I haven't done pre-inspections, but I'm not against it. I think it's a great idea, especially in an area like that, because you might end up with somebody that comes in, they waive inspection. If I get an offer and they waived inspection, I'm like, let's go. Because you can't back out of this thing unless your financing falls through, right? But if somebody waives their inspection and they have an FHA loan or a VA loan or a USDA loan, if you're in, the middle of nowhere, then I'm not gonna roll with that, because the lender won't roll with that. But if you get a conventional, loan and they waive inspection, I would take it. But pre-inspection, I think, are great.
Especially in Nunbury Park where there's issues with drainage and stuff.
Yeah. And the other thing you're gonna run into is buyers, especially were these first-time home buyers. Do you know?
Yeah, I think so, because they're renting.
Okay, so yeah, they're probably first-time home buyers.
Oh, yeah, the original.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. How many people have bought a house? Okay. How educated were you on the process before you started?
Not at all.
Okay.
Not much.
So let me ask you, if take away all the knowledge you have now, if I was your agent and you had an inspection and you're looking at the report because inspectors are obligated to put everything on there, otherwise it's a liability on them. Is that thing scary or what? Right? The little things are terrifying.
Right.
And that
Especially when
agent,
it's being needed to be fixed when it really doesn't.
exactly. They make big deals out of little things.
Right.
So
Well,
on the
they're
listing
in favor of
side,
the
that's,
buyer, right?
what's up?
The inspector is trying to write it in favor of the buyer most of the time, like it's, they're gonna put it.
That's hard to say. I've usually
Well, obviously
seen,
not favor, but they
Yeah.
really make a big deal, like you're saying, Adam, which ultimately ends up being.
it's not the inspectors that make a big deal about it. They're just writing the facts.
Right.
Because if somebody caught them being biased, they'd be in some serious trouble.
Yeah.
But I get what you're saying. But the reason that they write all that, like the little stuff in there, is because of liability, right? So say I did a sewer scope, right? Let's say I'm an inspector. I did a sewer scope for you. I said everything was all good, and then, you know, your whatever. What's in the sewer?
Big tree roots grew in there. and
You got
Yeah,
tree
you got-
roots up in your right.
Yeah.
Everything collapsed, right? And your house just smells like poop.
Right. Hey.
Then you can sue me, right? Then you can sue me because I told you it was all good. So that's why inspections will put it in there. But it's when buyers are looking at that, because typically buyers' agents aren't very educated on that process, and they're just as emotional as their freaking buyers.
Right.
They're like, man, I just want to make it seem like I'm their friend instead of their consultant,
Yeah.
which is what you really are. Like if you know how to work with buyers, you can make a fortune and have all sorts of repeat clients. But if you don't know how to work with them well, then
You gotta take the emotion out of it.
You need to.
Because when, on the list, an inspector says, there's a leak under the sink, it could be as simple as a little
Tiny
drip,
little-
little drop,
Yeah.
doop, doop, or it could
Plumber
be missing
tape.
the plumbing. I mean,
Right.
So, I mean, you've gotta, so when you're doing your inspections, don't just be in the car reading your iPhone. Pay attention at the inspection, so that you can,
Relay that.
explain to
Yeah.
the buyers, okay, well, you know, we can get a little plumber, or we can this or that.
They didn't even do a
or that.
counter offer.
Hmm?
They didn't even do a counter offer. They just said, oh,
They
this
just
is
backed
too bad.
out.
We're out of here.
Okay, so what does that tell you?
The agent, yeah, he
That's
That's a
agent was
weak
doing it.
agent. They just let the buyer walk
That didn't really
without
want
even
it.
trying to have a negotiation with the listing broker. I
It
feel
could be
it's
a lot
weak-
of- yeah.
5 years of
It could be a lot of things. It could be they were scared, they weren't serious. I've seen a lot of people just make stuff up, right? Because they don't have to show you the inspection. You guys all know that, right? I have no obligation to show you that. I usually end up getting it, but they don't, they don't have any obligation, or they found something else, whatever, right? But your job in that scenario is to get that thing done, address whatever problems, get back on the market like ASAP. Same thing with it's buyers and sellers. It's the same thing. You need to be like the rock, because they're all emotional. It's a big, scary process buying and selling a house, especially if you've never done it before.
Well, a lot of times when they're getting those, when you're doing the inspection and on like yours, oh, the sides work, they just have to make a note of it. They're not licensed, and it says, we recommend you get a license